You know, families have a way of keeping the ugliest truths locked behind closed doors. But secrets, especially the ones soaked in betrayal, never stay buried forever. My name doesn't matter, not yet. What matters is the night everything changed. I was only 16 when I learned the first lesson of survival in my family. You can love them, but never trust them. It started with my brother. The one who was always praised, always adored, always chosen over me. To the world, he was the golden child, the pride of my parents. And me, I was the shadow trailing behind him, the afterthought, the one who had to fight just to be noticed. But that year, the year my father's business empire was about to collapse, I discovered just how far my brother was willing to go to protect his throne. He didn't just take what was mine. He stole my future. And I swore that night I would take back everything he robbed from me. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about how family can wound you deeper than any enemy ever could. And how, sometimes, revenge is the only language they understand. The betrayal came quietly like a whisper at first. I had worked for months on a scholarship application. It wasn't just any scholarship. It was my way out. Out of the suffocating walls of our family house. Out of the constant comparisons. Out of being nothing more than his sister. It was my dream, studying abroad. Building a future that didn't depend on my family's empire. But the night before I was supposed to submit everything, my laptop disappeared. Gone. Just like that. At first, I thought I was careless. Maybe I misplaced it. But then I found it. In my brother's room. And what I saw on the screen. It made my stomach twist in ways I'll never forget. He had taken my essays, my letters, my research, everything, and replaced my name with his. He was going to submit it. Claim my words, my work, my dream as his own. And when I confronted him, shaking with rage, he just laughed. Laughed like it was all some harmless game. You really thought they'd choose you over me? He sneered. Face it, you'll always be second best. This family doesn't need you to shine. That's my job. I remember standing there, frozen, his words cutting deeper than any knife could. It wasn't just about the scholarship. It was about everything. My whole life, my existence, erased and rewritten by him. That was the moment something inside me shifted. The quiet, obedient girl they thought they could silence. She died that night, and in her place was someone else. Someone who wouldn't forgive. Someone who would wait no matter how long it took to make him choke on his own arrogance. That was the birth of my revenge. My brother submitted my work as his own. And the worst part, he won. The acceptance letter arrived weeks later, wrapped in praise and celebration. My parents were beaming with pride, parading him like he was some prodigy, their perfect son. No one ever questioned how a boy who barely strung two sentences together suddenly wrote essays that made seasoned professors cry. They didn't care. To them, he was the heir. He deserved everything, and me. I was invisible. My mother brushed off my protests, saying, "Don't be jealous of your brother. Be proud. His success is your success." Those words, they cut deeper than the theft itself. My own family asked me to swallow my pain, bury it under forced smiles, and clap for the thief who had destroyed my future. That summer was the longest of my life. I watched him pack his bags for the university I should have been attending. I stood there as my parents hugged him, told him how proud they were, how bright his future looked. Not once did they turn to me. Not once did they ask how I was holding up, but I stayed silent. I smiled. I nodded. Because I learned something important. Revenge thrives in silence. If they thought they had broken me, then they would never see me coming, when the time was right. I didn't cry when he left. I didn't beg my parents to see me. I simply promised myself one thing: when the curtain finally fell, it wouldn't be on me. It would be on him. And though I had nothing, no scholarship, no money, no support, I had one thing my brother could never steal: patience. Patience became my weapon. While my brother basked in applause overseas, I stayed behind in the quiet shadows of our small town. Everyone assumed I had given up. They whispered about how unlucky I was, how I'd never match up to him. I let them. Their pity became my disguise. What they didn't know was that I was building myself piece by piece. Nights were spent in the public library, poring over books he would never bother to open. Days were spent working odd jobs, anything to earn a little money, to keep moving forward. My parents mocked me for it. They told relatives, "She's just wasting time. She'll end up depending on her brother anyway." I never corrected them. Why would I? Their blindness was my shield. 2 years passed like this. I lived like a ghost in my own home, quiet, unremarkable. But beneath that silence, I sharpened myself. I taught myself skills: writing, technology, even how to read people's weaknesses. Everything my brother lacked, I mastered. Meanwhile, news of him drifted back like poison carried on the wind. He was thriving, they said. The brilliant son, the shining star, the one who was destined to take over everything my father built. And every time I heard his name, I smiled, not out of pride, but out of certainty. Because the higher he climbed, the harder the fall would be when I finally pulled the ground out from under him. I didn't want revenge that was loud or messy. No, I wanted revenge that was silent, inevitable, the kind that made him realize, too late, that I had been planning it all along. And soon the first opportunity arrived. The first opportunity came disguised as a crisis. My father called one evening, his voice thin, stripped of the booming certainty I remembered from childhood. "There's trouble with the firm," he said. "I need someone who understands the books. Come to the office." He said it like a summons, like an appointment with destiny. My mother insisted I stay home. My brother was overseas and unreachable. They had no idea I had been teaching myself the language of ledgers and contracts in the quiet hours. They did not know I had learned how to read beneath the numbers, to see where someone had been taking more than they should. I went. The office smelled the same: old paper and espresso, except now it hummed with a nervousness I'd never seen. Men who had once treated me like a ghost hovered with furtive faces. My father's assistant met me at the door with a stack of files and eyes that asked more than a polite question. "You can help," she whispered. I told them what they wanted to hear, and then I stayed later than anyone expected. I read every statement, traced every transfer, followed money like a trail of breadcrumbs. The deeper I dug, the more obvious it became. Someone inside the company was siphoning funds, setting up shell accounts, moving assets to a place where they could not be touched. It was calculated. It was cold. And it was precise. There was one signature that repeated on several suspicious invoices, an elegant, looping flourish I had seen before. My heart did something like a fist in my chest. The signature belonged to my brother. He had been sending invoices in my father's name to legitimate suppliers, but routing payments to accounts under his control. It was petty and brilliant and utterly unforgivable. When I raised it with my father, his face tightened, then softened like a man trying to choose between love and truth. "Mason," he said. He called me by my full name when he wanted me to understand the gravity. "You must be mistaken. Your brother wouldn't," but my evidence was precise. I had printouts, Time-stamped transfers. Bank references. The kind of proof that could not be folded away into excuses. He did not want to look. He did not want to know. That reluctance became an opening. I could have shown everything to the board. I could have exposed him immediately and watched my brother's life unravel in front of our family like a poorly staged play. But revenge is an art, not a tantrum. The moment you act in fury, you lose the advantage of surprise. Daughters, who made a different plan. I accepted a position in the firm, officially part-time, unpaid, an oddity my parents shrugged at. They assumed it was charity. I knew it was infiltration. I placed myself where I could observe, where I could learn the rhythms of the company, where I could watch the very people who believed themselves untouchable. I started small. I corrected a misfiled invoice in the back office and noticed which clerk thanked me with a too long glance at the clock. I learned who had access to the server rooms and who left passwords taped beneath keyboards. I watched the way my brother's proxies moved money, how they joked in meetings about creative accounting, and then laughed it off when the room went quiet. Every day I gathered more snippets of conversations, a misplaced USB drive, a bank slip accidentally left in a coat pocket. Little things that, when stitched together, would become a noose. And yet, even as I assembled the evidence, something unexpected shifted inside me. I would catch a glimpse of the boy my brother had been before arrogance hardened into cruelty, and a memory would stab me. Him as a child, scraping his knee, looking to me for comfort. It was a soft blade against my plans, a reminder that revenge could become ugly in ways I hadn't imagined. I steeled myself. Compassion was a trap. Sentimentality would ruin everything. If I allowed pity in, he would sense it, and the game would change. Then one afternoon, exactly when I had convinced myself I was cold enough to follow through, a new file landed on my desk. A name I didn't recognize. A transfer date 3 months from now. An offshore account flagged with a level of secrecy that suggested this was the heart of the scheme. It was the brick I had been waiting for. And it was also a clock. I slipped the file into my bag and walked out of the office as if nothing had happened. The city buzzed around me, oblivious. Inside my chest, something else buzzed too, a mixture of fear and exhilaration, like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing the only way forward was to jump. I had the evidence. I had the position. The rest would be patience, planning, and precision. But as I stepped into the late afternoon light, a small, almost childish part of me wondered whether I could ever live with what I was about to do. That question followed me home like a shadow. When I opened the door, there was a letter waiting on the hallway table stamped, "From abroad." I recognized my brother's handwriting before I even saw the name. The envelope, clean and crisp, felt like the hand of fate pressing against my palm. Inside, a single line. "Can we talk? I need to come home." He was coming back. When I read those words, "I need to come home," I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. For years, I had imagined his return only as a victory march. A golden sun celebrated again while I stood in his shadow. But this letter wasn't written in triumph. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, as if fear itself had gripped his hand. My brother was not coming back as the untouchable success. He was coming back as a man running from something. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my journal. It was proof that time had begun to shift in my favor. Days later, he arrived. The same confident smile stretched across his face as he hugged our parents, but his eyes betrayed him. I noticed the way they darted around the room, scanning for unseen threats. His laugh was a little too loud, his shoulders a little too stiff. To my parents, none of this mattered. They didn't see fear. They only saw their son, the prodigy, who had returned. Mother wept with joy, father poured him a drink, and the entire house filled with celebration. I stayed silent, watching from the corner, a smile plastered on my lips that they mistook for happiness. Inside, I was measuring every crack in his armor. That night, when the noise finally faded, I found him in the study. He was alone, sitting with a glass of whiskey, untouched on the desk. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something unfamiliar in his expression. Vulnerability. You've changed, he said. You're not the same little sister I left behind. I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably, as though my quiet was louder than any accusation. Finally he exhaled. Things are complicated. I may need your help, my help. The irony of it almost made me laugh. The brother, who once told me I would always be second best, who stole my future without hesitation, was now asking me for help. I leaned against the doorframe, my heart steady. Of course, I said sweetly. That's what family is for. He smiled faintly, relieved. He didn't realize that in those words, I had already sealed his fate, because family may have been for forgiveness once. But for me, family had become the perfect stage for revenge. It didn't take long to learn the truth about why my brother had come home at first. He tried to pretend everything was fine. He wore expensive suits, spoke of glamorous dinners, name-dropped professors and investors as though his world was intact. But the cracks showed quickly. He avoided certain phone calls. He flinched whenever the word debt came up. And once, late at night, I caught him shredding papers in the study, his hands trembling just enough for me to notice. I did what I had trained myself to do. I watched. I listened. And then I searched. It wasn't hard. He'd always been careless, confident that no one would dare question him. In his luggage, tucked between a stack of neatly folded shirts, I found documents that told me everything: unpaid loans, defaulted accounts, business ventures collapsing one by one, and worse. Names: shady investors. People not the type you simply owe money to. These were men who collected debts in blood when money failed. My brilliant brother, the golden son, had built his empire on sand, and now the tide was swallowing it whole. That night, I lay awake in my room, staring at the ceiling. I could expose him. One word to my parents, one slip of paper to the board of directors, and his legacy would turn to ash before dawn. But I wanted more than exposure. I wanted him to feel it, to live through the slow unraveling of everything he had stolen. To know what it was like to be powerless, forgotten, betrayed. And now, fate had handed me something precious. His own enemies, the very people he feared, could become my silent allies. Not through loyalty, but through timing. If I nudged just right, if I whispered in the right ear or leaked just the right piece of information, they would do the work for me. He would collapse under the weight of his own sins, while I stood untouched in the shadows. At tea breakfast the next morning, I studied him. He laughed at father's jokes, complimented mother's cooking, carried himself like the golden child he had always been. To anyone else, it was the perfect performance, but I saw the truth. I saw the sweat at his temples, the twitch in his jaw, the haunted flicker in his eyes, and in that moment, I knew his downfall had already begun. All I had to do was give it a little push. The push began with something simple, a whisper, disguised as concern. I waited until my parents were alone in the sitting room, sipping tea after dinner. My father had the newspaper spread across his lap. My mother was knitting, and the house was quiet except for the steady tick of the old clock on the wall. I sat down softly, as though I was carrying a burden too heavy to hold alone. My voice shook just enough to make it sound genuine. Father, Mother, have you noticed that my brother seems different? They looked up, instantly defensive. My father frowned. Different how? I hesitated, playing my role. I don't know. He seems nervous. He avoids calls, he doesn't sleep. I'm worried about him. I didn't accuse. I didn't reveal what I knew. I simply planted the seed. And like all good seeds, it began to grow in the silence that followed. My father brushed it off with a grunt, but I saw the crease deepen between his brows. My mother pursed her lips, the needles in her hand pausing mid-stitch. They wouldn't speak of it then, but the thought would gnaw at them in the days to come. Meanwhile, I made my next move. I reached out, discreetly, to one of the names I had found in his documents. A man known in hushed tones, someone whose reputation traveled like smoke. I didn't call him directly, that would have been reckless. Instead, I sent an anonymous tip through channels I knew he monitored. A simple message. The golden boy is back home, hiding under his family's roof. I erased every trace, burned the scrap of paper I had written on. By the time the message reached him, no one would know where it came from. Within a week, the atmosphere in the house shifted. My brother was more jumpy than ever, snapping at servants, pacing the halls late at night. He answered calls behind closed doors, his voice sharp, desperate. And then it happened. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, a black car slowed in front of our gates. Tinted windows. A shadowed figure in the passenger seat, watching. My brother froze. His fork clattered against the plate. His face drained of color. My parents noticed, of course. They looked from him to the window, confusion laced with worry. But they said nothing. Not yet. I lowered my gaze to my plate, hiding the small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. The game had begun. It didn't take long for the black car to become a regular sight. Some evenings it would pass slowly by the gates. Other nights it would park down the road for hours. Always silent, always watching. My brother unraveled quickly under its gaze. He barely ate, barely slept. He snapped at my parents, claiming he was handling business and that they shouldn't interfere. But the truth was written all over him, sweat on his collar, dark circles under his eyes. The twitch of his hands as he poured himself drink after drink. And I, the sister he once dismissed, became his only refuge. It started small. He would sit at the edge of my doorway late at night, glass in hand, muttering half-truths. Things are complicated, he'd say. You wouldn't understand, but I did understand. Better than he realized. So I listened. I nodded. I offered him quiet comfort, the kind I knew he craved but would never admit. I became the only one who seemed safe, the only one who didn't demand answers, the only one who didn't judge. What he didn't see was that every word he let slip, every detail he muttered between gulps of whiskey, was another stone in the trap I was building. He confessed about the debts, the investors he couldn't shake, the mistakes piling higher than he could manage. He confessed that he feared for his life, that the men watching our home weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. And then, almost pathetically, he looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Help me," he whispered. "You're the only one I can trust." For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered the stolen scholarship, The years I had been forced to disappear while he basked in glory. The silence my parents had imposed on me when I tried to speak the truth. And oh, pity was a luxury I could not afford. So I smiled softly and placed my hand on his. Of course, brother. I'll help you. What he didn't realize was that my help would be the most exquisite form of punishment, because I wasn't going to save him. I was going to guide him step by step into his own destruction, and he was too blinded by fear to see it. The next weeks were a dance. Every step, every word, every glance was calculated. I became the sister he confided in, the shoulder he leaned on, the quiet voice telling him, "We can fix this." Meanwhile, I whispered carefully to others behind the scenes. A misdirected email here, a tip to a concerned investor there. Nothing direct, nothing that could trace back to me. I let the chaos grow around him, and he, desperate and fearful, unwittingly became the architect of his own downfall. One evening, I arranged a family intervention. My parents were in the living room, puzzled but trusting. I sat across from my brother and began recounting his missteps, not in anger, not in accusation, but softly, logically. Like a concerned sister worried for his future. "You've been under incredible pressure," I said, my voice steady. "But the more you hide, the worse it gets. Let's bring the truth into the open, carefully, and you can still survive this." He nodded frantically, clutching my hand, as if I were his lifeline. My parents leaned forward, oblivious to the storm I was orchestrating. Then I introduced a solution, a set of steps, carefully crafted to force him to disclose everything to the right people. The investors, the board, the auditors. I framed it as a plan to save him, to regain control. What they didn't realize was that these steps were designed to expose him completely. The hidden transfers, the shell accounts, the unpaid loans, they would all surface under scrutiny. And he would have no one to blame but himself. I watched him follow my instructions with meticulous care, heart hammering, not in fear of me, but out of the desperate hope that he could fix what he thought only I understood. By the end of that week, the first cracks became visible to the world. Investors called, demanding meetings. Accounts were frozen. Auditors began asking questions no one could answer. And my brother, who once walked into rooms with pride, now walked in quietly, answering every query, sweating through his tailored shirts. Through it all, I remained calm, the supportive sister, the voice of reason. To my parents, I was the only one holding the family together. To him, I was his only ally, and the best part, every mistake he had made, every choice he had taken to claim what wasn't his, every lie he had whispered under our roof, was now coming home to him while I stood untouched, patient, and victorious in ways no one else could see, because revenge isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It waits. And when it finally arrives, it destroys everything. The day the truth began to surface, my brother looked like a man walking through fire. It started with a phone call. One of the investors, sharp and impatient, demanded an immediate meeting. The documents I had subtly nudged into circulation had reached the right eyes. The shell accounts, the falsified invoices, the hidden transfers, they were no longer secrets. He stormed into the house that evening, his suit rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his face pale. "They're calling me," he shouted, panic edging his voice. I can't explain it." I met his gaze calmly. "Then tell the truth," I said softly. "It's the only way." He froze, confusion flashing across his face. Truth. That word seemed foreign to him. For years, Deception had been his weapon. Now, it was his prison. By nightfall, my parents were in turmoil. My father's hands trembled as he read emails, letters, and bank statements that had been carefully assembled and discreetly delivered. My mother's face was ashen, her voice shaking as she whispered, "How did this happen?" And in the middle of it all, I remained the calm center, the voice of reason. "We can handle this," I said. "But he must face the consequences of his actions. It's the only way to rebuild trust." My brother tried to argue, tried to plead, tried to convince everyone that it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, but the evidence was undeniable. Each document, each transaction, each lie I had catalogued pressed against him like 1,000 hands, holding him down. That night, he retreated to his room, the weight of the world finally settling on his shoulders. He called me once, in desperation, begging for help. But by then, I knew he would have to face what he had done alone. I didn't answer, because revenge isn't about cruelty, it's about justice. And he had stolen from me, from our family, from the very people who had believed in him blindly. As the house slept, I sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. My heart was steady, my mind clear. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Power, not loud, not aggressive, not vindictive, just absolute, precise control over a situation that had once been entirely out of my hands, and I knew that the end game was close. The next move would break him completely, not just in business, but in the image he had carefully built. The pride he had carried like armor for so long. Because when you take everything from a person who believed they were untouchable, the fall is never gentle. The following days were relentless. Meetings, phone calls, auditors, and angry investors filled my brother's schedule. He could barely step into the house without a new problem waiting for him. Every email was a threat, every phone call a reminder of how high the stakes had become. And all the while, I was there quietly, patiently, carefully guiding him. I advised him on what to say, how to respond, how to handle the pressure. I offered my help in such a gentle way that he never suspected I had orchestrated the entire chain of events. At dinner one night, father looked at him and asked, "How did it get this far?" My brother stammered, looking between us, desperate for someone to rescue him. His eyes landed on me, and for a split second, I saw fear there, fear he had never known before. I leaned forward. "You made mistakes," I said softly. "But it's not too late to make amends. You just need to be honest, completely honest." His shoulders slumped. He nodded as if I had given him a lifeline. And in a way, I had, but it wasn't a lifeline for him. It was a noose, carefully untied and held in place by my hands. By the end of the week, the first public cracks appeared. News of his company's financial troubles leaked. Board members called emergency meetings. Investors withdrew support. Employees whispered about the golden son, who wasn't so golden after all. At home, he became a ghost of the confident man he once was. The arrogance, the charm, the golden boy smile all gone. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He couldn't lie convincingly anymore, because the evidence was everywhere. Undeniable, suffocating. One evening, I found him sitting alone in the study, head in his hands, muttering words meant for no one but himself. I never thought it would end like this. I knelt beside him, as I had done countless times before, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not the end," I whispered. "It's a beginning." He looked up at me, eyes wide, pleading for something I would never give freely again. And I realized the truth of it. The fall had not been painful enough yet. Not until he understood what it meant to lose everything he had taken from others, starting with me. I had taken my time. I had waited. I had planned. And now, the final act, the moment that would leave him broken and exposed, was within reach. Because in a house built on favoritism, lies, and stolen dreams, only one person could reclaim what was theirs, and that person was me. The day finally came when everything would be revealed. I arranged a family meeting under the pretense of sorting things out. My parents were seated, curious but trusting. My brother arrived, pale and tense, clutching a folder he hoped contained some control over the chaos. I stood before them, calm, steady and unwavering, the sister no one had ever truly seen. "Father, Mother," I began, "there are things that have been hidden from you. Decisions made behind your backs. Choices that affected not just your business, but your family. Choices you deserve to know about." My brother froze. I could see it, the flicker of panic, the realization that I was no longer the powerless girl he once dismissed. I opened the folder I had prepared. Every fraudulent transfer, every hidden account, every lie he had told was laid bare. The documents were undeniable, precise and public enough that even my parents could not ignore them. His face went from pale to red, then to ashen. He opened his mouth, stumbled over words, tried to claim mistakes, tried to deflect blame. But I had anticipated every excuse, every lie, every pathetic attempt at denial. I spoke slowly, deliberately, so that every word hit him like a hammer. "For years, you took what was mine. You stole my future, my dreams, my chance to be recognized for myself. You hid behind charm and our parents' favoritism, thinking no one would notice." He opened his mouth again, but I raised my hand. "No more lies. No more hiding. It ends today." The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. My parents sat frozen, the weight of the truth settling in. My brother's shoulders sagged. The mask of confidence shattered entirely. And then, the final piece, the evidence of his debts, and the investors now pulling out, was displayed. The reality hit him like a tidal wave. He realized that he had not just lost his empire, but his reputation, his pride, and the illusion of invincibility he had relied on all these years. He looked at me, finally, with something I had never seen: fear. Not just fear of the consequences, but fear of me. I didn't," he began, Shy said, quietly, with a precision only I could command. "You knew exactly what you were doing. And now you know exactly what it feels like to be powerless. To be betrayed by the one person you thought you could manipulate." My parents looked between us, the realization dawning that their golden child was not invincible, that the daughter they had dismissed, the shadow they had ignored, had orchestrated the truth, had waited, had planned every detail. My brother crumpled into his chair, speechless. And for the first time, he understood the cost of his arrogance, his theft, his betrayal. I stood there, victorious, not out of cruelty, but out of justice. I had taken back what was mine, piece by piece, with patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve, and as I watched him sit broken, I knew this. Revenge is not about hatred. It is about reclaiming power. It is about showing those who underestimated you that strength comes in silence, in patience, in precision. And today, I had claimed mine. The house was quiet after the confrontation. My brother no longer spoke in arrogance. He no longer moved with confidence. The golden mask he had worn for years was shattered, leaving only the man who had learned too late the consequences of his choices. My parents turned to me, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock, guilt, and awe. They had always seen me as quiet, obedient, invisible. Now, they saw something else: strength, intelligence, patience, and a power they had underestimated. I did not gloat. I did not revel in humiliation. I simply watched, calm and composed, knowing that justice had been served. My brother would carry the memory of this day for the rest of his life, as he should. The empire he had built on arrogance and deceit was crumbling, but the lessons it left behind were clear. He had been taught that no one is untouchable, no matter how golden they appear. As for me, I finally allowed myself to breathe. I had reclaimed what was stolen from me, not just my dreams, but my dignity, my voice, my place in the family. I had proven that patience, intelligence, and perseverance could overcome even the deepest betrayals, and as I walked through the house that had once felt like a prison, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Revenge is not about hatred. It is about balance. It is about reclaiming what is rightfully yours and ensuring that those who underestimated you never forget it. The chapter of betrayal had ended. A new chapter, one I would write myself, was just beginning, and in the quiet of the night I smiled, knowing that I was finally seen. Not as the shadow of my brother, not as the quiet girl my parents overlooked, but as the woman who had taken back her life, one calculated step at a time. This was my victory, my justice, my story, and it was only the beginning. All right, everyone, that's all I have for today. If you found this entertaining, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. If you want to watch more, please check out our playlist. Finally, a huge thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.